Hello and good afternoon. My name is Steve Pinelli, Chief Plumbing Inspector of San Francisco. And this is to welcome everybody to the last Building Safety Month meeting. This is in coordination with PG&E. We are talking about digging gas inspections and prevention from having any kind of damage to any type of situations. DBI inspects from the house to the gas meter location. This may be inside or outside, depending on the location of the meter. Plumbing permits are required when we do an alteration to gas lines. So in a lot of these instances, you will have somebody that has, like PG&E will have you move your meter from the inside of a garage to the outside location. Somebody would have to come in, move that gas line from inside to that location. At that time, we would ask for a gas test. So that's one of the sides here. Ensure that the inspection for gas piping testing is complete. At the time when the inspector comes out and completes that test, they will give you a gas tag, and we will actually put that into our computer system that a tag has been given to the contractor and or homeowner. This telling PG&E that the corrections have been made to the gas piping and that the system is tight and that they're able to put on the meter and turn on all appliances and devices. Again, make sure you get the correct permits. This is for any type of gas installation, not just for gas meter relocations. Call 2 days prior for inspection due to the fact that we have other inspections that we do throughout the day. We do get backed up, and we want to make sure that we don't have you without gas, so the timely matter, you can make it work both either way. Make sure your gas pipe is properly reamed prior to installation. A lot of people think that they could just cut pipe, thread it, and put it together, and that everything will be fine. We don't want to have it where you have a smaller orifice in the piping. We want full bore all the way through. And make sure you use proper material. We don't want intermixing of different materials. So there are certain materials that will not allow you to find them, so you would have to properly locate it using a tracer wire if it's underground. If you're using CSST, corrugated stainless steel piping, that would easily be able to find that. If you're using plastic yard piping, you would have to have a wire, 18 gauge, the depth of your piping. So there's a lot of different requirements for different materials, so make sure you're using the right material. With that being said, DBI PID, our division is working very closely with PG&E to make sure that everybody in San Francisco is safe and anywhere else that sees this video. And at this time, I'd like to welcome Aaron from PG&E. I forgot your last name, I'm sorry, to talk a little bit more about what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm Aaron Resendez. I'm in damage prevention. We are responsible for the education, for example, that you will receive today. And we also work with the construction industry on a variety of topics, all focused in on how can we prevent damages to underground utilities during the course of excavation. So just a show of hands, how many people here have ever dug or excavated before in their lifetimes? And what kind of excavation have you done in your experience for those? So you've done some, were you at your house or as part of your job?
Plumber.
So as a plumber, yeah. So you're replacing all kinds of water lines and things like that, working in new construction. Anything else that comes to mind? Yeah. Yeah, and if we had a room full of landscapers, they should all raise their hand, as I'm sure they have gone ahead and installed irrigation equipment and pulled out old yards. We see that a lot now in PG&E service territory, where we see the water crisis messaging going out, talking about the conversion of water-based lawns to California-friendly lawns that require much less water. But this is actually the legal definition for digging, and it gives a little bit of clarity as to how the state legally sees digging and how it defines digging. And I won't read it directly, but what's really interesting about this is basically anytime you move the ground, right, in any way, that is considered excavation under the law in the state of California. And so individuals, like I said, that do landscaping-related activity, do plumbing-related activity, are replacing sewer mains, PG&E, as it does its excavation work to replace and maintain its system, also is required under the law per excavation requirements to call 811. And we'll talk a little bit about what that process is here in just a moment. But I wanted to give you some perspective, because a lot of people wonder, well, what are the kinds of things that are common on job sites that create the hazard that ultimately results in a dig-in? And this is just a rundown of the common type of issues that we experience when we go out and respond and repair lines and have conversations with contractors about what was going on out here that ultimately resulted in the dig-in. Well, the top one is no call to 811 at all. And as was discussed a little bit earlier in some of the demonstrations, they talked about calling 811 at least 2 days prior to doing any excavation. And we spend a lot of time promoting and educating the contractors. We have workshops throughout our service territory. We have workshops here in San Francisco promoting what is the importance of calling before they dig. And a lot of folks will report that they knew where the line was. And oftentimes we see this as a legacy issue in the construction industry as folks say, well, there's a meter on the house or there's a meter on the side of the building, and we figured that the line ran in this particular direction, when in fact the way it had been installed was slightly different than the way they actually thought, and therefore they ended up hitting the line. We also see folks working beyond the actual lifespan of the actual one-call ticket. Anybody in the room know how long a one-call ticket will last once you make that phone call? And we'll cover this here in a couple of minutes. It's 28 calendar days. So the lifetime of a ticket begins when you call it in, and it will last for 28 calendar days. A lot of times folks who have work that proceeds even longer than that forget to call back and actually renew that ticket, which is part of the process, and it's built into it. Digging outside the area they originally thought they needed to dig. So they say they're going to dig here, and when we show up to the dig-in, we find out they've been digging on the other side of the property, for example. That's another common occurrence. No hand digging to expose those lines. The law says that you have to expose the line with hand tools. What we see is we'll go out and we'll see a backhoe that's dug into our lines, and we see that a lot. We also see a lot of folks that don't confirm positive response. And positive response, in simple terms, is the utility has provided some sort of notification. They've called you up. They've sent you an email communication. They might even have gone so far as to fax you a confirmation that they've actually been at the job site. And when you get there, you'll see the confirmation potentially is the markings on the ground that indicate that those particular lines are in that area of your delineated area. So they'll show up at the job site without doing that additional confirmation to make sure the utility has responded. And then lastly, they fail to protect the actual utility. So once that line is actually exposed and you can see it and daylight can shine on it, you need to prevent any sort of debris or any sort of activities at the job site from impacting that line that can cause a rupture. You're required to protect that line for safety purposes. And so on occasion, we see where debris will fall into the excavation, now open, and the line exposed. Material hits that line and the line ruptures. These are the kinds of common occurrences, root causes that we see when we look into our damage data. To give you some perspective, these are folks as to whether or not they had an actual one-call ticket or they did not have a one-call ticket at that particular job site when we went out and did our investigation on a dig-in. And as you can see, for no USAs where they have not called the one-call center to notify the utilities that they're going to be digging in a particular area, you can see 51% of those incidents that occur for us are caused by professional contractors, third parties. And then we have homeowners. For those dig-ins, 88% of the time, they have no ticket whatsoever. So we see that there's definitely some work here. We've made a lot of progress, but there's still some additional work to do. Steve?
Got a question. On those that you have where 51% are no ticket and 88% are no ticket.
Yeah.
What's the cost to that homeowner or that contractor if they happen to hit a line, or if you find out that they didn't call for a no dig, you're going out there and it's a possibility that they could have hit it. And on the retrospect is what happens if you go out there and they actually USA marks it and they actually hit a line? Who's the cost? They mark it wrong, let's just say, and they hit the line, or they missed it by 3-4 feet. What would be the cost on the opposite side? Who would take care of that end of it?
So there's a couple of questions in there.
Right.
That I'll also address that last question as part of the presentation. To get to your question about how much does it cost? So let's say, for example, a homeowner or a contractor is digging. They don't have a one-call ticket. They hit the line. So they fall within maybe this purview here. In that particular instance, on average, a bill for a service, if they hit the service that feeds into a house, say, for example, is going to be north of $2,000. If they hit maybe an electrical line out in the street, it can get into the tens of thousands of dollars. So it can get very expensive very quickly. And that includes the cost of repairing that line and all of the resources that were necessary to respond to also make that area safe. And so one needs to kind of consider that when they are digging without a one-call ticket. To your point about what do we do when we can't find the line, and I'll talk about that in just a moment, and when we talk about how do we follow up. What happens when I don't get information that I need or information that I expect while out at the job site? And there's a follow-up process for that, and I'll cover that in just a moment. But it is a good question. It is one that needs to be understood. Also, what about the impacts to the community from a public safety perspective? Not only do the fire departments get deployed to these scenes, but also the law enforcement to manage the traffic and the pedestrians in that particular area. Maybe they have to evacuate buildings. That takes resources away from other routine activities that they're needed for as well. So one might think of ambulatory services that may be impacted such that response times are now greater. Simply because an event could have been prevented, now the fire department, police departments are being adversely impacted and their resources constrained in order to respond. And in some instances, fire departments and law enforcement departments are now actually billing to those who are responsible for these particular incidents. So again, compounding, if you may, the financial impacts, not to mention the public safety impacts as well. And it all can be prevented by making one free call to 811. And so what I'd like to do is kind of walk you through very briefly what that process is. And what you're going to see here in just a moment is a shorter version of a 90-minute presentation that we make almost every day to contractors throughout our service territory, whether it be individually to them as employees or as workshops where we invite people to come in and participate in our workshops. So step one. Step one is marking your area. So you know you're going to have a digging-related activity. Maybe you're replacing lines of some sort, you're maintaining those lines, you're removing a tree, you're changing out the sidewalk, for example. In each instance, you want to make sure you go out and you delineate in white paint the area in which you're going to be digging. These are various examples of the types of delineations that one might see out on the field. And of course, if you walk around in a community like San Francisco, you will see these delineations. They're almost ubiquitous in a community in an urban environment such as this. But these are examples of the different types of delineations that can be laid down. And a lot of this is based on the Common Ground Alliance as a best practice. This is an industry organization that was actually responsible for the implementation of 811 nationwide. And they also work within industry to develop best practices, of which the kinds of delineations you see here are compliant with those best practices. So what about calling in? What about calling in a ticket? First and foremost, you need to call in at least 2 business days prior to your excavation, allowing the utilities an opportunity to respond, get to that job site, and put markings on the ground where needed, or respond to you maybe in some other fashion. As I stated before, they might call you, fax you, or email and say, we don't have any utilities in the area in which you propose your excavation-related activities. But one of the beauties of the law is it also allows for you to call even earlier than that. And that's where this 14 calendar days comes in. For larger projects, long-duration projects, maybe the complexity of the excavation going on necessitates an earlier notification, and therefore maybe even a field meeting to occur on the job site. And it gives you an opportunity to coordinate with the utilities and ensure that they understand the full extent of your work, and you guys can collaborate and ensure that that work gets done in a timely fashion by ensuring that the markings are done in correlation to your job and the necessary steps that have to occur. And then when they issue a ticket, they will ask for your name, your company, the address, the phone number, where you're digging, what kind of digging you're going to have, and when you're going to start that digging as well. And what they will issue you is a ticket number. So they will give you a number. If you provide an email, they will actually email you a copy of the ticket. You can see kind of a representation here. It will contain all the vitals. It will also contain all of the utilities that have been notified as a function of you calling in based on where you actually propose to do the digging. And so they will email that to you, and you can also go to the website where you can actually print out a copy if you wish. But if you provide them an email, they will email it to you. And then the One Call Center is a call center. In this case, it's USA North. It's located in Concord, California. Actually, it's a call center that PG&E, AT&T, and other utilities pay for a benefit. They take that phone call, and then they notify us of that particular excavation so we can respond in kind. And here's a little snapshot of the website. They've recently updated the website at USA North, making it easier for you to submit tickets very quickly. And the benefits here of using a website is that once you get in and you register as a user, you can actually already pre-populate a lot of the same information that would already be required on every ticket. For example, your agency name, your contact information, for example. So this is definitely streamlining the process and not having you make a lot of phone calls to the One Call Center. So field meetings, I mentioned it a little bit earlier. You can call up to 14 days in advance. There are certain legal requirements actually under Cal OSHA that require field meets to occur. Has anybody here ever had a field meet with one of the utilities for any reason at all? Yeah, we got a few. In this particular instance, if you are digging within 10 feet of any one of these types of facilities that you see here, pressurized sewer pipelines, a natural gas pipeline that's over 60 pounds of pressure, electrical lines that are over 60,000 volts, hazardous material pipelines. One might think of a petroleum line running to the airport, for example, as a prime example of one of those. In those instances, the law actually requires, under Cal OSHA regulations, that the utilities contact the excavator who called in the ticket and request a field meet prior to any excavation occurring. And at that particular meeting, we'll discuss what kind of excavation you're going to be doing and the safety measures that need to be in place to ensure that nobody makes contact with that line. And as a utility, PG&E will actually offer a standby if you're going to be excavating within 5 feet of our line. And in that instance, it's just another set of eyes to ensure the crew's safety and the public safety at that job site. And all of this is done in collaboration with the excavator. So a little bit on utility response. Here's a photograph that indicates that there's been a utility response. The colors are nationwide. You will find these colors from the West Coast to the East Coast and everywhere in between. It is a national standard. Delineations, the area in which you propose to excavate, are always outlined in white. And then the utilities will respond with the color that represents their particular type of infrastructure. So for PG&E, we will use yellow for our gas lines. We'll use red for our electrical lines. And you can actually see a few of them in the image here. You can see very lines there, and you can see the yellow lines here. And these would be the kinds of lines that you would see at a job site. You might see other types as well.
Potable water.
So the potable water is drinkable water. So this is the kind of water that comes out of your tap at home, that you fill up a glass and have a glass of water. And then the reclaimed water, which is down here, the purple, is water that has been purified, but it hasn't met the standards for drinking water, and therefore is used oftentimes for irrigation systems. So now you'll start to see a lot of cities are putting in kind of the purple pipe, and oftentimes you'll see sprinkler systems or water valves that are actually colored in purple to indicate that those water valves are serving lines that have this reclaimed or recycled water in it. And it's used, again, for a lot of purposes, irrigation in local communities. And then once you actually confirm that the markings are there, that the utilities have responded, you can look at your ticket, use it as a checklist to make sure that you've received a response from all the utilities that have been notified. You now are required to hand dig to expose that line. And these graphics represent the area in which it's required to do so. And the law says that it's 24 inches from the outside edge of any subsurface facility. And so you can see there in the representation, we show you where those measurements would be taken. And based on the approximate location of where a marking might be on the pavement, they may indicate the diameter of that particular line. So you'd take half of that diameter, add it to 24 inches, and that's kind of the outer edge of, if you may, of the area in which you have to hand dig to expose those particular lines.
How deep is the line buried?
It's going to range depending on when that line was installed. It might be 18 inches in the average yard for a homeowner. It could be multiple feet deep in an urban environment like this. And of course, we have to take into reality when we install new lines that, there's a lot of other facilities down underneath the pavement. And so we may have to put it deeper in order to accommodate that as well.
One more thing on the question. The question was, how deep are the lines? My few slides ago, I was going to ask you a question was, when you have those field meetings and you have everybody that comes out and they sit down, they go through the steps of, where the lines are, how we're going to dig around them, where we're going to get there. If you find that you have an area where you have either a vault or, power lines or gas lines or whatever you might have in that area, even fiber optics, whatever, does there get to a point where you say, look, there's no way you can dig in this area, it's just not going to happen, you're going to have to go to another area and tunnel under, or is there any exceptions to certain areas, like you can't do this, you can't do that? Because I've never seen it where, I've seen where you have it where things just can't be moved and you just can't get there. Is there just an exception to?
So there are going to be situations where the complexity and the challenges underneath the surface pose unique challenges to the construction project going on. That's the value of a field meet. The value of a field meet is we get a better understanding of the kinds of excavation you're going to be doing. Are you going to be installing a new sewer line? Are you going to be putting a new water line? Are you just rehabbing an older line where you're doing an insert, for example? By understanding what those complexities are, we're able to bring to bear the information necessary to determine, can that particular type of digging occur in this particular location? And in a complex city like San Francisco, that's where the value is even more so, simply because we have a lot of older infrastructure here. We've got layering of infrastructure that has occurred over the many years.
And then
So
the other thing, I'm pretty sure you're probably going to get to it, but I know it's at 48 hours to dig, get somebody out there to market and move through. If there's an emergency, somebody has a broken water main, somebody has a broken sewer line, there's right now, we just found it's happening, we need to have this fixed right now. Is there a way to get somebody out there immediately, or is it still a 48-hour? Because I know if it's a 48-hour, somebody's got a broken main and they want to fix it, they want to have water, they want to fix their gas or whatever, they're going to expect to do it right then and there. They're not going to wait that 48 hours. Is there something that would come into play at that point?
So the law actually has in it a caveat that talks about emergencies, and the emergencies are predicated on the impacts to public safety. And so in the instance where you've got a hazardous material, natural gas being released into the atmosphere, without a doubt that falls into the emergency category. You've got a large water main that's burst beneath the surface. You have the road blistering. You've got water pouring out at all the seams in the street. That's an emergency. Where we run into these issues is when people abuse that particular process. So you have a landscaper that's just gotten a job on a Friday for Saturday morning, and they call in an emergency ticket. Installing a fence is not an emergency. It's typically going to be municipal infrastructure, utility infrastructure, or maybe the interruption of service has impacted a hospital, a 911 center, or some other critical community service. And those are the kinds of responses where we will definitely make every effort to respond as quickly as possible to those particular types of emergencies.
One of the reasons why I ask is because one of the things that came into play, and it was not too long ago, was sewer line that was broken, was affecting neighbors down the block, and it was an emergency type service. It was an apartment building that was affecting everybody else. So their sewage, you got 40 people in there. It's going to make a big impact. They came out within, I think it was 3 hours, 4 hours. They were able to come out, mark, so they were able to dig at that kind of a situation. I just trying to put it out there to make sure that people know that there are certain situations that are to be construed as an emergency that they need to know, but you still need to call. Just don't assume it's going to be an emergency. You just got to make sure you contact the right people.
And that's really critical, is making that important 811 phone call. So the utilities get it immediately and can start assessing and making the necessary response.
An example of where that worked in Napa.
Hold on.
An example of that is in Napa, when we had the earthquake, was that in 2014, where they had several water leaks on their system in the city of Napa, and we sent up a bunch of mark and locate crews to actually go out there with the individual water crews to locate and mark before they went in there and started working on their water lines. So it is possible to do that. You and I can work together when you have instances like that where you need quick response that 48 hours just isn't gonna, but like, a fence is not putting in a fence is not an emergency, but, water lines, stuff like that, yeah.
So hand digging, a little bit on hand digging and power-operated equipment. As I mentioned, one of the major root causes that we see across PG&E service territory when it comes to digging is the use of power-operated equipment. And I gave an example of a backhoe, where we see, arrive at a dig-in, and we see that backhoe has been used to expose that particular line. You want to use hand tools, again, in the area, the approximate location, to determine the exact location. So oftentimes, the depth question that was asked a little bit earlier is determined simply because the requirement is that they have to confirm where that exact depth is. And what happens over time is streets get changed, elevations get changed, natural erosionary processes have influences on the surface such that the line might have been installed at a particular depth, but the surface has changed such that that depth has become less than what it was when it was originally installed. And so for safety measures, they embedded into the law the requirement to determine the exact location, which is the depth in this particular instance, by utilizing hand tools, the safest method that we have available to us under the law. And then, of course, power operated and power driven. So if you're doing boring, or you do ask, hey, can I use vacuum excavation equipment to expose lines? You actually need to get agreement with the utility to be able to do that. Some of the coatings, for example, on our transmission lines can be easily compromised with the high pressures, for example, that a lot of folks use when they're doing vacuum excavation. And so we want to make sure that we have a conversation with you to make sure we understand the dynamics so that we can make the assessment and, if necessary, give that approval. So a little bit on following up, and this kind of gets to the earlier question. What if I don't have all the information? What if I can't find what I'm looking for? What if I find something that I didn't expect? And certainly in San Francisco, there's a lot of older infrastructure that's been abandoned in place, so one might find these kinds of things out there. But there's other reasons why you might actually call 811 again. So I talked a little bit about the 28 calendar days for the life cycle, if you may, of a ticket. Well, if you have a project that's going to go for 2 months, you're going to need to call in and extend that particular ticket. The caveat here is you don't want to wait until the 28th day. You want to make sure that you call early enough. So, give yourself a good week before that ticket expires and call back in and say, hey, we need to extend this ticket. And the people at the job site can make an assessment as to whether or not the markings are still visible, and maybe you don't need the utilities to come out and refreshen up those particular markings. But if those markings have been obscured, maybe there's been heavy equipment, moisture at the job site, dirt and debris that's obscured those markings or made them less visible, then you can call in and ask for an extension and say, hey, I'd like to have the remarks. I'd like to have these freshened up so my employees know exactly where these lines are, and the utilities will respond in kind. Also, you may need to extend the area of your excavation. So as I pointed out a little bit before, you might have an excavator that originally called in a ticket to excavate over in this location. And I said one of the problems we have with dig-ins is they started digging over here because they found out that the scope of the project had changed during the course of the job. When that happens, when that scope changes, the imperative under the law is that you need now to call in and inform the utilities, I've changed the area in which I proposed my excavation. And you cannot begin digging until the utilities have gone ahead and responded, as I discussed a little bit earlier. But lastly, unable to locate the utilities at mark. So maybe you're hand digging, you're trying to expose those lines, you're not able to find them. You need to stop work, call 811, and they'll notify the utilities, say, hey, we're not able to find this particular type of utility. Or maybe you're digging and you find an unknown utility, you need to identify it. Is it in use? Is it somebody's that we don't know? You can call 811, notify the utilities that you've found an unknown, and they will respond in kind and try to determine whose it might be. And then a best practice in the industry, oh, go ahead.
So who coordinate all those markers?
So in the case of PG&E, we have our own locating teams that will actually respond. Different utilities will have their own locators that will come out and respond. So when you call 811, you go to a call center that's located in Concord, California. It's USA North, Underground Service Alert. They are a call center that takes the information from you, maybe as a caller. They'll ask you your name, your contact information, where you're digging and when you're digging. And they will automatically send that out to all of the utilities. So it might be the city and county of San Francisco. It could be PG&E. It could be a telecommunications company. And then those companies will respond in kind with their locating teams. But we always suggest and recommend as a best practice that you have a copy of the ticket at the job site. That way you have the vital information you provided the one-call center, but you also know which utilities were actually notified, so you can confirm that they actually responded as well. And it also includes contact information that allows you to reach out to them directly if necessary. So that's all I have, and I really wanted to thank the city for having us here today, and I appreciate the folks who took the time today during their lunch hour to come and see what we had to provide today as far as safety information around excavation. Thank you.
Thank you.